Hello and welcome to another episode of the Manufacturers Leaders Podcast with me, Mark Bracknell, Managing Director of Theo James Recruitment. On today's episode, we had Steve Pugh, who is an experienced leader in manufacturing, but also founder of Roadmap MBA. Couldn't wait to have Steve on. Steve is a fellow podcaster, really good at what he does, very coherent, excellent communication skills, and just someone who, when he talks, you listen. So I was really excited to have him on, and it was a great episode. We sort of bounce around various things regarding leadership, talking about the best environment to think as a leader and to be creative. We debate the route into work and potential route into manufacturing, how important are degrees, the problems with the traditional route into industry and into work. And we talked a lot in detail about Roadmap MBA, which is a fantastic business, essentially providing an alternative to the traditional MBA, university MBA, completely free. And this has really helped entrepreneurs get a starting, a step up into the world of owning a business and understanding what it means to run a business. And it was really exciting. So if you are someone who works in manufacturing, or perhaps someone who's thinking about starting their own business, this is a brilliant episode for you, because Steve goes into detail about exactly what it takes, what life is really like as an entrepreneur, and give you those starting steps and some detail about Roadmap MBA, which I'm going to massively encourage and do myself after listening and after being involved in this episode. So thank you so much, Steve, for coming on today. It would massively help me if you please subscribe, like to whatever channel you watch and listen to. It really means a lot to me and helps us get good people onto the show. So thank you very much. Sit back and enjoy. Great stuff. Right, so today we welcome Steve Pugh onto the Manufacturing Leaders Podcast. And Steve is a fellow podcaster, putting me to absolute shame with his kit there. It's you're probably like a Hollywood set. I'm probably Granada Studios in comparison. So welcome,
it's
Steve.
The quality of the content that counts.
Let's hope so, yeah. How are you? All good?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Just busy, working away. I actually did my last podcast yesterday, and if I would have planned in advance, I would have kept this all set up, but I forgot. So nice. It is what it is. But no, good otherwise. And I think the world's busy at the moment. But again, a lot of manufacturers, which is my kind of background, have got challenges at the moment. So it's almost where everyone's, chipping in, fighting on with it, and I guess doing our best.
Absolutely. And we'll go into detail soon about your background and obviously you've been a founder at Roadmap MBA, which I think is super fascinating. You mentioned there, obviously, your background in manufacturing, which is great. Before we get into it, first question I ask everyone, what does it mean to you to be a leader?
Ooh. See, it's funny because I play a lot of sports. So sports leadership is different to business leadership. And the funny thing is, again, with that, it depends on who you're talking to. Because if you're talking to the team and the staff, it's absolute confidence and credibility and trust. Yeah. But then likewise with people that you are on parallel with, it's the humility to say, look, I'm human. We're trying to figure this out together. I'm not going to get everything right, but we're going to do our best. And we're going to, it's a funny thing, but we always often joke that it's the parents and the kids. And that's not meant in a derogatory way, but almost sometimes the parents, you can fight behind closed doors. But actually, it's that element of where we show a combined face to the team. And actually, I've worked with people in the past that pretended that they were perfect and they knew everything when that blatantly wasn't true. And the issue is, as soon as you lose trust with someone, or as I call it, my kind of bullshit meter, it's gone. The relationship was just kind of gone as well. I don't mind someone saying, I don't know the answer, but we'll figure it out together. And it's almost where that for me is leadership. It's not about having all the answers. It's about almost moral direction. And obviously that the more you understand stuff and get better at strategy, and it helps you be a better leader. But I do think that you can be a leader at 15, 16. It's just about character.
Yeah, I love that. Do you think that balance has shifted somewhat in regard to the humility side of things? Because past leaders, I don't think that was at the forefront, where I think it really is now.
But relating to what Theo James do, I think there's a reason. So if you go back to the 70s and 80s, when you had times of high unemployment, businesses could be more brutal in their approach, because if you go back to the Victorian era, staff were treated horribly. It was just a case of literally whipping them and forcing them to do stuff, and people were genuinely just happy to have a job. Fast forward to 2023, the world's changed, and in many ways there's a lot of abundance. We've had 14, 15 years of pure economic growth, and now we've got the opposite problem where there's more jobs than there are people. And therefore, relating to that, it's almost where, and I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do, but people think, well, actually, I can get a little bit more money, or I don't like the way you treat me. And so I think it's had to change. And that's also part of the narrative, I think. But
Yeah.
people often forget about how the world has changed in 30, 40 years for the better.
Yeah.
But I think leadership has changed because of it. But I don't necessarily think it's always a better change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, there's a power shift obviously there. I think it's probably, like you say, mindsets have changed anyway. I think the way people are treated has changed for the better. But you're right, there's a power shift. And I speak for myself. I've gone through a period of time where I've been fearful, probably more so in the early days, of losing staff and making decisions based on not wanting to lose them, probably against what's right for the business or even them in some situations. So I get that completely.
But if you go back to Marcus Aurelius, the Roman Empire, leadership itself hasn't changed, and he was famous for his moral integrity and that kind of thing. So the world is 100 million times different now than it was, but I think the core principles are the same. But the other narrative, which also it's worth throwing in, it's a little bit controversial, is that people now expect more, rightly or wrongly, that a lot of employees, it's about me, and it's less about we. It's less about the team. It's less about how can we help Theo James or the business be successful, because that pays my wages. And I think that is, again, part of the narrative, because they all think they can jump ship somewhere else. Because actually, if we're in the middle of a big global recession somewhere, and people thought, oh, you know what, if I lose my job, I can't get another job, I think they would act differently. And because I interview a lot of people for the companies that I do run, you see it a lot. And I think it's also a generational thing that I think we're about the same age, but you have a lot of millennials and slightly younger people that now they have never learned anything else, and they just expect to walk out of university into a 40 grand job. But I think people often forget, and it's going back to the manufacturing question, the business still has to afford it and pay for it. And if the sums don't add up, and this is one of the parent things that people often forget, it's always like, what's my pay rise? What conditions can I get? How can I get more? And at the back of my mind, it's like, look, I really like you, but I have to balance the books because I have to look after the other 20 people and keep us afloat. And I think that's the real leadership thing of, understanding people. It's the empathy, it's to build that relationship, but also you've got to be firm, because if you're a weak leader and you just give in to all these demands, that ship's still going to crash and everyone's going to die. And it's almost where it's not always about being liked, but it's about people understanding why you made the decision.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I really like that analogy as well. Let's go right back, Steve, because you've had a really interesting and successful career, like even at the stage you're at now. And I love.
Well, you can define successful, but I've had an interesting career.
What you're doing now, I really want to talk about in detail. But did you mentioned there before you can be a leader at 15, 16. Were you someone who, when you growing up, knew that was going to be your path, or how did you get to that? You did.
So I was in Cubs and Scouts growing up from the age of like 5 or 6. And in Cubs, if anyone knows, you go through and you have sixers, seconders, and you have leadership positions just at young ages. And I always thrived at that. But even like I was playing basketball last night, for me, it's about the team and as a whole. And I hate to leave anyone behind. And that was true from, like, I was always physically fit, but likewise, if we're on a hike somewhere, often some of the guys that I was with, you'd be pounding away when you said about doing the 3 peaks before. But I'm always worried about the guy at the back. So I'll slow down the team so even from an early age, yes, that was always kind of me. But what was really kind of a bit of humility was that often when you do A levels and stuff, I went on to do mechanical engineering, and you're often pretty good at what you do. But then when you go through to university, you're with the smartest people in the country, but also from other countries. And likewise, in our department, we had about 120 people in our year. And I'd say maybe 30, 40, 50 from like China, Far East. And what was really fascinating was that the Chinese education system is completely different to ours. And if you gave them a mathematical problem to solve, they would nail it 100%, no mistakes, nothing. I would get like 45. But if you said to someone, okay, we've got a problem, how do we solve it? they were flummoxed. They didn't have a clue. And what I kind of learned at university was almost to play to your strengths. So I can do the other stuff, but I'm not great at it. But actually bringing people in, free thinking, idea generation, and actually still a logical higher order thinking to figure stuff out is what I'm really, really good at. And it's almost as I went through my career, because like after, I won't bore you with the whole story, but I've been able to do things and figure things out that nobody's ever done before. But it's just through absorbing information and trying to figure out and process it. And like one was when I was working for the Tees Valley Combined Authority for 3.5 years back in 2010. Obviously, we'd just come off the 2008 recession, and companies, manufacturers had no money because they'd just burned through it in the recession, just trying to survive. But my background is also offshore energy, so it's how you build oil rigs and stuff. And there was a UK-wide problem about how companies like Wilton Engineering and the big fabricators wanted to make oil rigs and really big projects, wind turbine stuff. But they didn't have the cash to put down on something called performance bonds to allow them to bid on the contract. And it was a major bottleneck in the whole economy. So I went and spoke to banks and accountancy firms and the firms themselves and government. And basically, I figured out a way to solve it using £10 million of government money. And it's unlocked about £300 million worth of work and thousands of jobs for the Northeast. But I'm not an accountant. I'm not a finance person. But I was able to take all the data, figure it out and make it work. And that ran for 10 years. It's just finished. But the point is that the ability to look at a problem, you don't have to know the detail. It helps, but you don't have to know the detail of the specifics. But if you can look at things in a certain way, it helps. And that's what I tend to do with business, as well as other life stuff.
Love that. I've been doing a lot of work with, I guess he's a life coach, more recently about flow, about working in flow and feeling that flow state. Is that, you mentioned there things that would be out of flow for a lot of people. They feel out of control and not in the comfort zone. Doing all that stuff you did you think you're pushing yourself out of the zone, or did you feel very comfortable doing that? Because that is very different for different people, isn't it?
The thing that I find funny, so I'll tell you the true story. So if you give me a set of information, so for instance, I watch Bloomberg and I get a feel for what's going on in the world, what's going up, what's going down, and how and why do I invest in different stuff. But often for me, the best thinking is when you're not thinking. So some people say it's in the shower, but that's not me. It's when I'm driving, but actually the real crux for how I solved that problem. And what was really fascinating was that I was sat at a desk in Teesside on my own. And I figured this thing out. And about a year after we'd launched, we were invited down to the UK Business Bank, Central London, 1 Victoria Street, to tell them about what we'd done and how we'd done it. And they couldn't figure out how we'd done it. And I was like, well, I did it on my own. I'm not even a banker, finance person. But the bit that was the crucial, hardest bit to solve was to do with EU state aid rules. And how you using government money to fund contracts don't break the law was essentially the thing. And nobody could figure that out. I figured out in KFC on Teesside Park, thinking about my fancy football team for the work thing we were doing that day. But the point is, it was when I was switched off on something else,
yeah,
I just twigged. And I won't bore you with how and why it happened. But for me, it's that you often don't have, it's not about concentration, or at least it's not for me. I do concentrate on stuff, but actually the real magic, I think, happens when you process stuff in the background. And then I can't comment for your life experience or someone else's. This is just what I've always been able to do. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, because you've got that awareness for you that is your, when you're driving, or do you give yourself, or do you think people should give themselves time to switch off from activities, but at the same time, a space where they can think, or how sort of natural is that?
I don't have time to.
And that's a challenge, isn't it? If you're running a business, or you're in a stressful position, or people don't find the time, and I'm in that boat.
But most of the time, it's driving to work in different bits. It's just around life. One things I do find, it's one of my big kind of life lessons, is that when I'm unhappy, my creativity dries up. So if there's, and I've genuinely realized this. So if I'm under a bad work environment, pressure, stress, whichever, when I expose myself to new stimulus, be that new music, so I love to listen to new music I've never heard before, art galleries, just general stuff, walking around. My wife loves to shop. So when she goes and looks at makeup counters, and makeup is very good for advertising, I look, well, that's interesting. How have Chanel done that? And I try and always bring that back to engineering and manufacturing, because that's 20 years behind how other industries like sell themselves. But it's almost, but when I'm in a happy place, I'm a lot more creative, and that's when I do my best work.
Yeah.
So you could argue it's being aware enough that when you're just unhappy to do with whatever the stimulus is, fix that. And often that will, sorry, my camera keeps going out of focus.
All
But
right.
actually then that's often what then gets you into the real magic, the flow state.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you know, you worked in different industries and you did different industries within manufacturing as well. You find people now, and they're almost a job for life thing is kind of gone. It's almost not even a selling point now, to some extent. You know, it's actually become something that people necessarily shouldn't do because you get more life experience. Has it been something you have aimed to do, to work for different companies in different positions and gain different experiences?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So, for instance, when I was at university, two of my friends, one a guy called Phil went to work in Formula One on aerodynamics for Ferrari. He went
Yeah.
to Force India first, then to Ferrari. One of my other friends, Preet, works for Rolls-Royce on jet engines and does the design for the thermodynamic heat exchangers on a very specific part of jet engines. But when you do that, you do the same thing for 15, 20 years. So he'll be 20 years into his career now. That's not me. And I always knew that wasn't me. So when I'd finished my undergrad, I'd actually went into construction. So I went to work in Jamaica. It was on $100 million bauxite chemical refinery because I like working on different projects, doing different cool stuff
Yeah.
and working with real people. It was just unfortunate that I graduated in 2007 and the 2008 recession hit and it hit construction pretty bad. That whole career path changed. I couldn't have took it any further. I probably could have, but I didn't want to. Um, so I was offered to do a PhD back at Sheffield University, and that was on aircraft landing gear. And they had a $20 billion problem to do with, I won't even bore you, it was to do with maintenance. But the real reason I actually took that gig is because there was a girl I was trying to win back who was in Sheffield, and she's now my wife, so it worked. But the idea was I didn't go specifically for the thing. I
Yeah.
had different life kind of goals. And then when I finished that, I moved up to the Northeast because that's where Lisa had moved up to, and she's from Darlington originally. That then it was a case of, well, you know, I had the choices of stuff I could do. And actually the job came up at regional government, which looked really interesting, to look after all of the offshore energy companies and solve problems there to help support economic growth and job creation. That actually, it was interesting. And that was in many ways one of the best jobs I've ever had. But in many ways, that was my favorite job because it was all about economic growth and job creation and help just giving back. And it was just through doing a good job there. It was actually a private sector company that did engineering design. And I'm a chartered mechanical engineer by background. Offered me a job to kind of do business development, and they were kind of grooming me up to be their next MD. And I was getting to learn at like 29 a lot of the high level strategy stuff about how you take a company forward. But then I just went on that path into different stuff and almost managed to blag my way through a career. That my next job after that, because in that job in 2014 we had an oil and gas downturn, so I was getting made redundant there.
Yeah.
I was lucky that I managed to get the managing director job at a company in Sheldon, which is a manufacturing business, which again it was CNC machining, lots of other kind of bits and bobs. I left there to join Techmar in Newton Aycliffe for their flotation. So I was Techmar Group PLC's first employee. And my job there was to look after all the corporate strategy for what they wanted to do and oversee some of the M&A stuff. And the first one was a company called Subsea Innovation, which is in Darlington. And they make really cool, big stuff. So I was at Techmar for a while. But then when I chose to leave there, it was at that point I decided to start to work for myself, because it's almost where I'd had some bad career experiences, shall we say, in the previous three employers, that actually I kind of just wanted to take my own destiny into my own hands. But what I was able to do was just combine all of the other stuff from everything else I'd done into, in theory, my hobby. So that my first ever business was a photography business when I was doing my PhD. And that's how and where I learned to do all the cameras, lighting, everything else, which now I do a live stream podcast, it's part of my business.
Yeah.
But I learned it 15 years ago unplanned, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's how you can just bring things together.
Yeah, it does. I love that. I mean, I did a media degree till TV and radio production, and it's funny, isn't it? Because I always thought it was a wasted degree. I've never used it, and suddenly I'm starting using this, and actually realize it actually was a passion that was hiding there all along. It's interesting, isn't it?
Media studies back in the day was viewed as a bit of a joke thing.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
But actually, in the past 6-7 years, it's really like taken off.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I kind of, probably because that was a stigma behind it, I probably agreed with him and said, yeah, it was and I did a course in careers guidance for a year because I kind of wanted to come away from something professional. So they both link quite nicely, but actually a lot of the skills, and it's the confidence. I think for me, university depends what you want to do. And there's a big argument, a fair one, the university route, look at manufacturing, the apprenticeship route, and I can see both advantages. And I don't necessarily think that university has to be the way forward. Now, I really don't. But for me, it taught me life skills, confidence, living away from home. You mentioned yourself there. You were with people from different nationalities and different cultures. That's priceless.
As a prime, so true story. So where I grew up in Liverpool, it was in a town called Maghull. Maghull has about 30,000 people. I think in the entire town there was 2 black families. There might have been 1 Chinese family, and I think that's it.
Yeah.
So I grew up only with white Scousers. That was it.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And ironically, everyone had, give or take, the same amount of money. And what I really found difficult was that when I went to university, I remember my first ever day, it was for like Freshers Week, and there was a house party. And I remember going to a house party at one of these flats. It was a place called Endcliffe Vale Flats. And I remember some of the posh kids were almost looking and pointing at me because, like, who the fuck are these chavs? Whatever. Sorry if I can't swear, but anyway.
You can, yeah.
But it was that element of just, I felt out of my depth because it was a different thing. And then what's funny is that you I think it's all kids are the same, but you just want to fit in.
Yeah.
But what you did do, I think after a little while, I realized that I deserved to be there. And I think it's that kind of thing does take a while to do. So the life experience was mega important. Wasn't always enjoyable, but I wouldn't be where I am now. And on the university debate, I completely 100% agree that you do not have to go to university. Certain things it does help, because actually, as you'll know as a recruiter, if you're recruiting for a CEO, they often look for chartered mechanical engineer or engineering background, so what thing is, an MBA, so a Master's in Business Administration, and 20 years experience.
Yeah.
They're often organizations, if you're new to them, are less likely to take a punt on someone to come in to run the company. As where you see it quite a lot, where someone comes in, the chap I spoke to yesterday, they come in as an apprentice and they work all the way through up and they become the CEO. That is absolutely a brute, especially if you're smart enough to do that. But it's when you come to leave, for me, life skills are more important than the paper. I know loads of people with degrees that are useless.
Yeah.
And ironically, because I have 3, I can say that because I'm not judging. Well, I am judging myself, but it's about other stuff. But it's given confidence to people that didn't go to uni. You've avoided 60, 70 grand's worth of debt if you look at fees now. So it's a better choice because you can start to earn from day one.
Yeah.
And I think there is still a bit of stigma that, yes, in certain disciplines, certain things, yes, you still need a degree. But I'd say in a huge proportion, even my wife is a partner in a law firm, but you can now do a legal apprenticeship. Medicine, you still need if you want to be a doctor, you still need a degree, which I agree with because you don't want to get that wrong.
Yeah.
But you get my point is a lot of manufacturing stuff is that they can teach you stuff on paper in a university, but unless you know what swarf feels like and smells like when you get hit by shards of stuff that flies off a CNC machine and you're like, oh, I need to shut that guard. And you learn on the tools and that is priceless.
Yeah.
And it's people should never underestimate how important actual job life skills are.
100%.
And don't worry about the paper.
And it's still the curriculum, which is when I did a year as a careers advisor in a school. And that was 15, 16 years ago. And the advice for me to give advice to them was that the kids with good grades should go to university. The kid with bad grades should look at apprenticeships. It's just all wrong.
I think that's changed. But the irony is, because I interview a lot of entrepreneurs, often the people are they don't always respect authority, shall we say. I used to get into trouble a little bit. They often go on to be the entrepreneurs. Like people always say that people with straight A's work for people that got D's.
That's right, that, yeah.
And I actually think it's true because you just learn different skills that in many ways, and it's my working class roots coming through, is that when you go through university, you're fighting for everything. But the truth is, kids that come from more privilege, they could have 2 parents from a middle class background, whatever, they might not have to work at Pizza Hut whilst they're at uni to just pay for themselves and feed themselves. But if someone's working 15, 16 hours away, I used to work in supermarkets. If they're working in a supermarket, that's 15, 16 hours that they're not studying, they're not going to networking events, they're not doing all the stuff. But also, my mum couldn't have introduced me to someone to get an engineering job. But actually now, because I've gone from middle class to working class, even though I hate to admit it, I have a network. And the system is still set up where rewards people that come from a certain place because they can afford uni. They might not have to get a loan, which then helps them when they want to get a mortgage. They haven't got as much debt. They've got the networks. They'll get the better jobs. It's just the system isn't fair. And that's part of the big reason why I created Roadmap, is just to almost help balance that out, to give people anywhere in the world the support and the ability to learn stuff that otherwise is kept behind, really difficult, deep paywalls.
Apologies for interrupting this podcast for a very quick 30-second pitch of my business. Theo James are a specialist manufacturing and engineering recruitment search firm based in Seaham in the Northeast. If you're looking for any staff or a new opportunity yourself, from a semi-skilled level right the way up to C-suite executive, then please get in touch. We have a specialist consultant in each discipline ready to help. I'm extremely proud of what we've built over the years, and I'd love to extend that service out to you. Thank you. Enjoy the podcast. You mentioned obviously you went from working in big businesses and some really impressive business to working for yourself. How was that mindset shift? What are the key differences for you for being in a very responsible position, as an MD of someone else's business versus running your own? What was the key differences for you, would you say?
Well, so I think the nuance around this is because most of my income was as a management consultant. So I was still running other people's businesses just on a contract day rate kind of thing.
Yeah.
So even now, a lot of my time is buying companies, selling companies, running the companies, doing the leadership position. I'm just not technically employed.
Yeah.
So that side of it was always standard. And what that allowed me to do was bootstrap the growth and the roadmap of my startup, which meant that I didn't have to go out and borrow £300,000 from someone else to do something. But actually, because I've realized this about myself, because of how my kind of brain works, I like to have a varied difficulty and range of stuff to work on. That ironically, when I do the podcasts and just in the creation of the book, I both wrote the whole thing myself, did all the graphic design, did the layout, had organized all the printing, but there was a huge creative element to it, even when I do the podcasts and stuff. So that's a big tick for me. That if I just did manufacturing leadership, the truth is, if you're MD in a business, you can still do all that stuff for the business. But I enjoyed having the range of stuff. The one thing that kind of got me, which was a big decision, which I'd be interested in your take, is that one thing's because I believe I have a lot of empathy and I'm always trying to think about other people. But it's that element of where I was always reluctant to hire people for me because I knew I'd be working every hour God sends, worried about paying Sally's wages rather than feeding myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't move.
So it's almost, but because of the strategy, when you have like an app or a business which you can scale, like a tech business, it's not actually about bums on seats. So therefore I knew, and I won't bore you too much with the reasoning behind it, but when I operate and Roadmap operates in a multi-billion-dollar industry, I can't fight a head-on fight against the guys with literally billions of dollars in funding because I'm going to lose that fight. It's like going into a heavyweight boxing match. I can't win that fight. And I realized that the one thing I had, especially when we've got the mission to make business education accessible and we give virtually everything out for free, the only way that works is if I have really low overheads. So what I did was still to run other people's companies as a consultant to pay for everything, pay for the room, pay for the studio, everything. But actually that allows me to follow the passion and follow the mission with the startup. Yeah. So ironically, I never left. It's just a different mentality. The real big change though, is that when you often work for an established organization, especially if it's not yours, you go in and you do the best job you can. When it's your business, it's personal. So if someone slags off Theo James or they ignore you, they don't think it's worthless. In a sales mindset for someone else's company, fine, you just crack on. But you do go on this roller coaster where you're like, why am I wasting my time? Should I just do something else? Should I give up? Should I not give up? And when you run your own business, you have those highs and lows that you just don't get in paid employment. And I can say that because I do both.
Yeah.
And people often underestimate how different it is in some ways. The skill sets are the same, but the approach has to be different.
Yeah, it's a mindset shift. I can completely understand why people who have had businesses which unfortunately have failed
Yeah.
go through really, really dark times, and it's always in my mind that it's almost like not fear of failure, but I definitely had a fear of failure mentality, probably from year 2 to probably when we started hiring people, because you're right, and suddenly you've got a level of responsibility, and it's everything you do is to make sure to pay them.
The thing for me isn't fear.
Yeah,
I'm fully aware, and I will consciously kill a business at the right time.
yeah,
I'm fine with that. I have no qualms about that. Going back to the Boy Scouts thing, if I know that I've done my best, I would close the business tomorrow. If the bank manager said, "Look, Steve, it's done, you go," I'm fine with that. I think when people have the trauma, is that when it happens to them when they don't expect it, something which they can't control, but it's so I know someone that ran a cleaning business and they did a lot of big commercial stuff for people like Carillion. If
yeah,
Carillion goes bust and they don't pay your wages, that's not your fault. So the trauma is going to hit you because actually it's
anger.
everything you've worked for is gone.
Yeah,
I feel that for me, it's almost because I'm quite good at the business strategy stuff. I'm always looking at what's going out there, and I know that AI is a massive threat to it, and I know this. But actually, so I'm willing to either pivot or kill it or whichever, because that's the fight I'm in. The environment is always changing. It's the entrepreneur's challenge to navigate that. If you have your head down and you're not looking up, and something just takes you out, in some ways that's on the entrepreneur. Sometimes you can't see it, in which case, well, then you couldn't have done anything. It's like being in a plane crash.
yeah, yeah.
But it's as long as you've done everything you can to mitigate the risk, I think that's okay.
And it gets back to what you're saying. That's where the creativity aspect comes in, because you've always got to be looking for those challenges, those things that can blindside you. It's but actually
And
it's a fun part if you embrace it.
it is the fun part, but it's also you have to be quite objective.
Mm-hmm.
So as a prime example, so in theory, I spent probably 2, 3 years writing a book. This was pre-COVID, 2018. I decided to work for myself in 2019. COVID hit in 2020, March 2020. And at that point, I think, I want to take the idea of a book, but actually turn it into more of a product-based business, a course, or whichever, which I did kind of from scratch. And the idea is that I always wanted to learn business education as I grew up. Even after I graduated, I had a passion for business. I wanted to learn more and learn all the really kind of good stuff. But the truth is, if you knock on the door of a university, unless you can pay 30 grand, they don't care. And a lot of the private sector courses are, again, a couple of grand. And what they do, they exclude regular people that can't afford that. But if you also consider that half the world's population lives off less than $6 a day, they definitely can't afford that. So there was a huge market opportunity there that like 5 billion people can't access skills which will help them. So I was like, well, actually, it fits with my morals. I'm smart. I've figured that out. I've already got most of the nuts and bolts of it. I'll build the business around that. So I chased that business for 2, 3 years, and actually it's gone really well. We're in 57 countries now.
Amazing.
But in February, March this year, ChatGPT comes out. And what that does, it's made people realize, and it's getting better and better and better. And although AI isn't directly linked to what we do as our core business, I go to seminars, and what people have realized is that at the moment you type into the prompt, write me a business plan, and it'll pop up. But within, I think, 2 years, 3 years, it'll be your virtual Mark Bracknell. And basically it'll be, so Mark, how do you help me with this business problem? And basically you're going to get customized, personal, tailored business education, or any education, including from age 6 all the way through. I'm not going to say it'll be free because it won't be free. But the idea is that the whole entire education landscape has changed forever. The bullet hasn't hit the patient yet, but it's been fired, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
I've
does.
seen it in the air. And it's that element now of where I know that I can't compete with OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, who are developing these huge, they're all trying to build something called AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. But like Jarvis and Iman, that will be able to do everything that we do better. I know it will. So I can already see that bullet in the air. So for me, it's either I pivot and change, or I just let it kill a business. And I'm fine with that because I couldn't have done anything with that. But it's better that than I spend another 4 years head in the sand, pretend that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I've remortgaged my house and done all this stuff that then the business does go bust. I lose my house, my wife leaves me. You can see it coming. And the point is that is true if you understand business and you look at risk, and if you have all your contracts with Carillion, you don't have other income and whichever, there is an element of where business education would have helped them survive. And that's part of the reason why we want to make it free, that anyone can access it. Because it's not about me getting rich, it's about helping regular people build their own lives, if that makes sense, or careers.
Makes perfect sense. And it'd be good to talk a bit about that, because there'll be people listening who, exactly what you say, they can't afford MBA.
Yeah.
Their company can't afford to put them through it.
Mhm.
How does that work then in practice? So someone is listening and thinks, I'd love to be educated at that level.
No, well, the other side to it as well, it's a bit of a con.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I'd had 15, 20-year business career before I decided to do my international MBA, and I
Yeah.
did it at Sunderland University. And I did it, and this is true, I did it as market research to judge against the roadmap and what we do.
You'd already
Because I
planned it.
wanted to, I wanted to judge against how, if you drop 10 grand to do that online international accredited degree, both I wanted to see how my stuff stacked up, but also as someone that kind of knows what they're doing. Is what the universities teach even useful? And I want to be really critical, but truthful. I know I have a horse in the race, but just genuinely for you, and I would say 90%, 95% of businesses, it's a waste of time. Because if you can spend a whole module on international trade indices and why the UK should trade more with India for different reasons, that's not going to help Theo James recruitment. It's not going to help a manufacturer in Children. It's not going to help regular companies. But the point being that there's a perception that business education from universities is useful and good. If you want to go and work at one of the big, international consultancy firms like McKinsey or Bain, or even if you want to go to Google or Meta in a really senior executive role where you're doing really clever stuff, then it makes sense. But that's not 97, 98% of people. So what we do with the roadmap, and if you go to roadmapmba.com, I'll put basically if you use discount code GIFT123, you can get everything for free. But essentially what we do is we distill an entire business curriculum down into one single place, one roadmap, one course, which teaches you everything you need to know, from stuff about personal brand, which we're both passionate about, business strategy, sales, management, marketing, leadership, finance. If you get your first managing director job and you get given a board pack with the profit and loss account and the balance sheet, and you don't know how to read it, that's actually quite hard to learn. We've got a module on it. And the idea is what we want to do is help support people that are in their career that want to progress to that next level. They might have kids, they might not be able to afford to go to university, etc. But actually, that then again holds back people from regular poorer backgrounds, because people that are multimillionaires can afford to do that, and they can go to Harvard and drop 200 grand. But for me, it's more of a social impact mission, that it's just trying to help people like me growing up. But there's billions of people much worse off than I was. But it's trying to just do something to try and help break the status quo. But also within that, our approach is actually fundamentally different. That universities teach the theory, and they get you to write exams to play back the theory. We are all nuts and bolts doing to actually help you make money, more money next week. And that's what nobody else teaches.
Love that. Excellent. I think it's amazing. And you're right. When you look at schools now, the curriculum is to get you to pass exams. And
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
MBA is exactly the same. Do you find, we speaking to people, that people want an MBA for two reasons? Either they want to learn and be better at the job,
It's bragging rights.
or bragging rights. Yeah.
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 And but it's, and don't get me wrong, so it's funny this, when I was working at the Tees Valley Combined Authority, I used to go on business trips. So I was hired, or I was working on behalf of UK central government to fly around to foreign embassies to give the pitch for offshore wind for England, to get people to come and set up factories. And I remember I used to be, and I think it was on £32,000 at the time. And I'd literally be on an EasyJet flight to Madrid or somewhere just to go and speak at this thing. And I would flick through the in-flight magazine, and there's always one in there, come and do this MBA. And like for me, it was a dream, it was an aspiration based on where I thought I wanted to be. It's almost like an achievement thing. It was like when I always wanted the managing director job title. I didn't even know necessarily what it was. I just wanted it for the prestige. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
I don't even regret it. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But the irony is that then when you actually look behind the curtain, when you actually know what you're doing, they're not always what they make out to be. But my big thing is that some people pretend it is, but because they've invested a shit ton of money to do that and get to that point, they want to back up that it was worth it. And
Mhm.
I've got loads of friends that spent, 25 grand on the course, but then they didn't work for a year. So then they lost out on however much income. They still had a mortgage to pay. They're 50 grand in the hole through doing a course, which didn't help them progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the thing is, but no university is going to tell you that, because of course not. They want to charge you. But then also, even a lot of your kind of regional magazines and people that we know, like in the even LinkedIn and that kind of thing, they're often funded by the same universities. And one of the things that got me yesterday is that I, as a Sheffield Uni alumni, got a letter through my door, and you get these kind of begging letters twice a year. Fund some students, they're struggling with the cost of living. It was like, yeah, they're struggling because you're charging them an absolute fortune for something that I still would recommend, if you can afford to and you've got the talent to study engineering, especially mechanical engineering. Brilliant. You'll get a fantastic career from it. But there are degrees, like we said before, that maybe don't have as much value. A lot of, say, humanities, English, arts. For me, if you're a brilliant writer, just go and write. Go to France, follow your passion, create art. For me, you don't need a degree to do that. Because the other thing about a degree, it's always subjective. So you're going to get marked against someone else's view on what you do. And they might say, oh, it's terrible, that's a D. As where the irony is, when I was again at the Combined Authority, when I had the idea to create this catalyst fund, so it was called the Tees Valley Catalyst Fund, I remember going to my boss at the time, who's the chief exec, called Stephen Catchpole, and he was like 4 layers of management above me. I said, Stephen, I think I've figured this thing that I think can help businesses in the region. And he said, Steve, it's a crap idea, but if you want to go for it, go for it. And the point is, I could have said, oh yeah, fine, he must know more than I do, I'll give up. I didn't. I was like, fuck it, yeah, why? And it worked.
Yeah.
And then ironically, when we got the money and it was this big success, he took credit for it. But it's that element of where, in many ways, never let anyone, me included, tell you that your dream isn't worth following. And I think that's the big thing that with education is, because you literally get a grade. I know loads of people that can get downhearted because you got an E.
Yeah.
When actually you might have got an E in French. I'm terrible at languages, but I'm really good at this.
Mhm.
And that's the issue of just, I think that the whole system needs to change.
Love that. What do you think is the bigger challenge now, would you say, for entrepreneurs or people wanting to become an entrepreneur of sorts?
Okay, so right now, what are we in? So we're in October 2023. Interest rates and uncertainty.
Yeah.
That if I would have started the exact same startup 5 years ago, people would have thrown 5-10 million pounds at me to do the same thing. I spoke to a VC firm the other day, based just on the idea. I spoke to a VC firm the other day, and unless you're looking to now achieve something like 100 million annual recurring revenue, that's your target, they're not even interested. So the point is, if you've got a business that you want to launch, because a lot of VCs are losing money, they're only going to back the absolute certainties or the ones which are just mega moonshots. So if you have an ambition to start a business, if you can, see if you can bootstrap it, get it off the ground. If you want to start a recruitment business, do it in your spare time around your other job. Just get going, get some income in and start slowly. But I think the other arguable biggest challenge is expectation. There's so much stuff on YouTube where basically, oh, well, if you do this, you'll get 100 grand a month and you'll get a Lamborghini and you'll get it in 2 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Tax free and all this sort of stuff. Yeah.
And it's actually one of the things that I struggle against, because with the roadmap, we don't promise anything. It's a hard slog, but if you learn the skills, you will do better. But there's no quick win. And then you say that to a 20-year-old who's ambitious, and then someone else is like, yeah, but if you do my course, I'll teach you how to do 10K a month doing this in 2 weeks. They're going to pick that other one. But I think its expectation is the hardest thing. So we've got mutual friends, even yourself, me, that I have a huge respect for people that have learned their craft. and just kept going. And they've been doing their business for 20, 30 years. And they've learned and they've pivoted and they've achieved so much. But often the hardest bit is either just getting started and having the confidence to quit your job. There's a guy in this co-working space that messaged me about a month. Well, he didn't message me, he literally knocked on my door and said, Steve, I've quit my job. I'm going to start a business. And I was like, wow, just spray. But the point is, it's if you ever can start it small whilst you're working, just get some momentum, test them, see if people want to buy what you're selling, and then build it. Don't expect it to happen overnight.
Yeah, and I like your advice about working it and just start small, because I think to earn a business, you've got to be a specialist at it to some extent. You know, when people just exactly that, see someone online and go, I can do that, I'll start a business. But you're better off starting something you know, starting small and building from that.
Because the other big thing that people underestimate is luck.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, like I have a really good product. People tell me it's great. The reviews are great. I know it's good. But there's people that they've launched something, but they're just more popular, or they got lucky, or they got a press release and they've just taken off. And that is true that out of every 100 people that start a business, 2 of them, 5 of them will be in the right place, the right time, the right introduction, they take off. It's don't beat yourself up. It's annoying, but actually they don't necessarily have this magic secret sauce that you don't have. It's just time and it's network, it's connections, it's whichever. And that is hard to deal with because it's not, if we were in a 100 meters Olympics race, it's whoever's fastest wins, whoever's best wins. The world isn't like that. But then by the same token, at least we're both born in the UK, that we have certain advantages as white middle-aged men, that if we would have been born in the desert in Kenya, we couldn't have created a business or a podcast or, you know, and that's almost where you kind of just have to do the best you have and be content with your effort. And then if you can take pride in what you've tried to do, even if it works or it doesn't, you can still take pride in it, which I think is the important thing.
Love that. And I love what you wrote about MBA does, because like you said there, not many people can afford to do an MBA. And actually gaining the experience, doing your course whilst probably working, is also going to give them not only the skills, but the confidence to be able to do that. Because a lot of people just fear they're not good enough because they can't read a profit and loss sheet. They've never seen these things before. So
but you'd be surprised about how much confidence is a thing.
Yeah.
That actually, the whole point we exist is to give people confidence to go, you know what, I can do that.
Yeah.
Because the other thing which is funny is that you also have like the big platforms like Udemy, Coursera, Skillshare, that, you know, you can do a mini micro course in marketing or sales or whatever, but there's 200,000 courses on the platform. How do you know which one to pick? You type in, I want to do a sales course. You'll literally get 20,000 options. Well, what's the right one for me? How does it work? So we literally wanted to give the clues in the name, the roadmap, just give you everything in one place. We have one product, one course. It's all there. If you're not interested in something, just skip it. It's not school. We're not going to judge you. But the idea is that it's to look at what goes on in the world. But the really important thing was just doing it for free. If you do Coursera courses, even at 40, 50 quid each, which doesn't sound that bad, you probably, to learn a full business curriculum, need to do like 20 of them. Suddenly it's quite expensive.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing of where, as a business, I had to just look at the global market and see if there's a niche. And I think I've found it. And luckily, it's a thing that I'm passionate about. So it's helping regular people grow their business and careers. But it's still a really hard slog to get off the ground and make it work.
Yeah, love that. Well, I've got to get you away on time, but I've got some great,
that's fine,
3 quick fire questions, which I'll ask you. 3 things or 3 words we say make up a good leader. First thing that's come to mind.
Trust.
Yeah.
Honesty. And I'd say conviction, because basically you don't want a leader that will change his mind based on what other people tell him. They can take on the information, but you don't want to get blown like a ship in the wind. You need to know, boof, that's what we're doing. Yeah. And then people will trust that and buy into that.
Like it. Biggest influence from business, entertainment, or sporting world, would you say? Anyone that springs to mind?
So it's funny. So on that wall, which I know you can't see, I play basketball. And ironically, it's a guy called Kobe Bryant. Yep. So Kobe Bryant's mentality was famous for just being single-minded on, I say success, but it was achieving his goal. But what was really fascinating about Kobe is that even after he finished playing basketball, he won an Oscar for the other things and other passions. So he was a very smart, talented man, but he genuinely worked harder than everyone else. That is a huge inspiration for me. So on that wall, I have signed pictures from Kobe Bryant, Bill Gates. There's a new women's NBA player called Sabrina Ionescu. Do you know who David Goggins is?
Oh, yep.
So David Goggins, it's that whole get hard mentality that when I'm in the office, it's a long day, I can't be asked to make that next call. I look over there and say, what would Goggins do? And he'd tell me to do it. But the point is, you can get inspiration from different people. And likewise, I've also got LeBron James and Ed Sheeran, and actually Phil Knight from Nike as well, who started. But say Ed Sheeran, it's a guy that's worth 400 million, but he still hustles. He loves what he does. He signs CDs. He's hustling, and he doesn't have to. And I respect that. So it's those kind of people.
Love that. Best book or audiobook podcast you've ever read, listened to, apart from your own, obviously?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think actually, just because I was probably 17 when I read it. Do you remember Alan Sugar, obviously, of The Apprentice?
Yeah.
But he had this book. It was his autobiography, and it was really thick.
Yeah.
And I read that when I was like 16, 17, whenever it came out. And it was the guy from a working class, he was Jewish background, but it's almost working in market still worked his way up and how he overcame challenges. And I think that combined with everything else probably actually helped put me on this path.
Nice.
That I could go into loads of other regular business books afterwards, but I think it's the right intervention at the right time probably set me in that direction that then I've improved. But I think that's a key one.
And look, this has been great, Stephen, and really, really appreciate your time. So many lessons there. I love what you do. I think the MBA, is fantastic. I'll obviously put a link on there for people to, and I'd love to do it myself if possible. I think
yeah, of course, yeah,
amazing. So I'll hook up with you after this to talk about that. But I'll make sure everyone knows who you are, where the links are to go to, because this has been. I think it will help. I think you're helping a lot of people, and entrepreneurial world is very difficult, very challenging. The government do everything they can do to put entrepreneurs off now, let's be honest. So anything like this that can help in a cost-effective way, I think is amazing. So thank you so much.